Throughout ancient times, across various scriptures and religious traditions, a universal warning has been passed down to humanity. Lust will destroy you. Whether in the teachings of the Bible, the wisdom of the Bhagavad Gita, or other sacred texts, unrestrained sexual desire inevitably leads to spiritual and moral ruin, causing destruction both within the individual and throughout society. We see this in the story of Sodom and Gomorrah in the book of Genesis, where cities were destroyed by divine judgment for their rampant immorality and sexual sin. The fall of the Roman Empire was driven in large measure by the rise of unchecked desire. As indulgence and excess began to replace the values of discipline, duty, and personal integrity, the very foundations that had once sustained the empire began to disintegrate. Many declines in civilizations are attributed to excess desire. Desire for sex, desire for wealth, status, and power. In the 1930s, J.D. Unwin's research of over 80 primitive civilizations found that societies practicing sexual restraint had stronger social unity and were more successful economically, culturally, and morally. He argued that sexual restraint was crucial for societal health and prosperity. However, when societies allowed sexual indulgence and the breakdown of traditional sexual norms, Unwin observed a decline in social cohesion, economic stability, and cultural development, often leading to moral decay and societal collapse. In esoteric interpretations of the Garden of Eden, the forbidden apple is often seen as a symbol of sexual temptation. When man takes a bite of the apple, it represents the first act of surrender to lust, leading to the fall of man. It's a warning about the dangers of indulgence, showing how giving in to desire can unravel our very nature. Today, man can take a bite of the apple with a simple tap on his phone, a device that grants instant access to sexual gratification. With pleasure so easily within reach, the temptation remains the same: to indulge in desires that once led to humanity's downfall. The apple may have changed, but the danger is the same. Unchecked lust continues to shape and degrade our society. The erosion of sexual boundaries and the easy access to instant gratification have become commonplace in modern culture, with serious consequences. Today we're surrounded by highly sexualized media, online platforms, and a culture that often celebrates indulgence. The tools of pleasure may have changed, but the results are strikingly similar to those that led to the fall of past civilizations. Just like ancient empires, we're seeing the slow breakdown of moral and social structures, and a breakdown of man and manhood. The erosion of the family unit, the rise of pornography addiction, and the way intimacy is treated as a commodity, all driven by the unchecked lustful forces that threaten to undermine society. At the same time, many modern women are encouraged to see career advancement as the primary path to fulfillment, while the value of child rearing is often downplayed or seen as secondary to professional success. Meanwhile, the cost of living in society is rising at fast speeds. Societal pressures have made it increasingly difficult for a man to support his family on a single income, further weakening the stability of the traditional family structure. Men are too becoming weaker. As technology advances, life is becoming more automated for convenience, and we're doing less to get what we need. Jobs can be done from a computer. Food and shopping are delivered with the tap of a screen. And many things you may desire can be purchased and sent to your door within hours. In contrast, the 80s and 90s required much more physical effort to accomplish things. Convenience was scarce, and there was simply less to occupy people's time. Access to information was limited, and the world felt much larger. Conditions were grittier, and with fewer distractions we often faced boredom head-on. Social connections were crucial, as we didn't have the digital world to occupy our time. Knowledge was harder to come by, and we often had to go to great lengths to seek it out. More kids played outside in the 80s and 90s, spending hours on playground equipment, riding bikes, and running freely through the neighborhood. The days were filled with physical activity, often without the constant supervision of adults. Kids fell over more, hurt themselves more, but in doing so, they became stronger and more resilient. With fewer distractions like smartphones and video games, children spent more time in the fresh air, building friendships and developing both physical strength and independence through active, sometimes risky, play. Today's children grow up surrounded by screens, spending much of their free time in front of them. They are more protected than previous generations, spending less time outdoors, less time exploring, and more time indoors. Instead of engaging more in physical activity, they spend more time in sedentary pursuits, stimulating their minds while their bodies remain largely inactive. Today, most men have access to smartphones that provide unlimited adult content, enabling them to spend hours in a constant sexual state, often leading to masturbation and ejaculation. It's likely that the rates of masturbation have increased significantly since the 80s and 90s, when access to such materials was more limited. Men who frequently use their phones for this purpose keep their testes in a continuous state of sexual activity, producing more sex hormones and depleting semen in large amounts. The body must work to replenish itself after each loss. While some claim this has no negative effects, there is growing evidence suggesting that reproductive activity, including that of sexual stimulation, semen production, and ejaculation, may drain and deteriorate the energetic resources of the organism and ultimately shorten lifespan. Various species of animals die upon ejaculation. Some male marsupials in the Dasyuridae family die after mating due to a collapsed immune system. Salmon die after mating due to the extreme physical stress and energy depletion during spawning. There are many other examples. Excessive activation of the testes increases the production of sex hormones, which may affect lifespan. Organisms that produce lower levels of male sex hormones, such as females in many species, generally tend to live longer. Neutered animals also experience this lengthening of lifespan due to halted production of sex hormones, although neutered animals often suffer various other physiological issues. The reduced emphasis on reproductive processes may contribute to longer lifespans, as energy is diverted away from constant reproductive cycles towards sustaining vital bodily functions. Reproduction is, of course, essential for the continuation of the species. However, the excessive use of this biological function for purposes beyond procreation has contributed to widespread degeneration and societal decay. The message to take from this is a simple one: avoid sexual excess. Exercise control over your desires and do not let them dominate your life. Your semen is not just a biological fluid, it is the seed of creation, arguably one of the most precious substances in the human body. It is the very essence from which life is made. Ancient cultures often referred to it as the soul fluid, believing it encapsulated the soul itself. Your body expends great energy in producing it, and as such, the use of this vital resource should be intentional and meaningful. It should be reserved for the profound act of creating new life, rather than squandered for mere self-gratification. When we have control over our sexual instinct, we can make decisions based on rational thought, rather than sexual inclination. We can stand for what is good and moral, rather than what is only pleasurable in the moment, yet destructive in the long run. With control of our sexual instinct, we can focus intensely on a subject without the influence of sex diluting our attention. Self-control and discipline are the true measures of manhood. A man who keeps his lust and desires in check is able to fulfill his role as a good father, husband, teacher, and productive member of society. A man who lacks control over these impulses, whose mind is consumed by lascivious thoughts, will ultimately corrupt himself and those around him. Driven by self-gratification, he will pursue his desires at the expense of the well-being of others, eroding the very foundation of his relationships and his character. If we have a desire for goodness and virtue, for working within the bounds of nature and thus the will of our Creator, then we must abide by the laws of nature. Transgressing these laws will always come at a detriment to the mind, body, and soul. Frequent stimulation of our sexual faculties saps our vitality, weakens the mind, erodes our morals, and in numerous subtle ways undermines both our physical and spiritual well-being. Overindulgence in our baser instincts diminishes our ability to tap into our higher faculties. Our capacity for intuition, perceptiveness, spirituality, and other finer qualities is dulled when we overengage with lustful impulses. By focusing too heavily on these lower functions, we impair the very faculties that elevate us above mere animal instinct. When we gain control over our lustful impulses, we gain control over our lives and our destinies. The rampant pursuit of sensual gratification not only detracts from our personal well-being, but also weakens the moral fabric of society. By resisting the pull of immediate pleasure, we open ourselves to higher purposes, living lives of greater love, purpose, and mutual respect. In such a society, people look out for one another, not driven by selfish desires, but by a shared commitment to building a stronger community. Avoiding excess lust isn't about rejecting our natural desires, but about redirecting our energy towards something greater. Lust is man's biggest weakness. Gain control over this impulse and you gain control over yourself. A society that has gained control over lustful desire will inevitably flourish.